The fluorescent lights of Sterling Industries' conference room hummed with indifferent persistence as Naomi Carter stared at the contract in front of her. The words swam across the page, each legal phrase more suffocating than the last. Marriage of strategic alliance. Duration of 3 years. Financial compensation upon completion. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the pen she hadn't realized she'd been gripping. Across the polished mahogany table, Marcus Sterling sat with the stillness of a predator. His dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness, a sensation she'd spent 10 years trying to suppress. "I don't understand," Naomi said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why me?" "You could choose anyone." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This isn't about choice, Miss Carter. Your mother's medical bills have reached critical status. The hospital has given you until the end of the month before they discontinue her experimental treatment." The words struck like a physical blow. Naomi had worked tirelessly, taken on extra projects, sold everything she could spare, but cancer's appetite was insatiable. Her mother, the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put her through college, was dying, and Naomi was drowning in debt trying to save her. "How do you," she began. "I make it my business to know things," Marcus interrupted, his tone as cold as winter steel. "My company needs to merge with the Carter Foundation. Your family name, despite your current financial situation, still carries weight in philanthropic circles. This marriage solves both our problems." Jonathan Reed, seated beside Marcus, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps we could give Miss Carter time to—" "She doesn't have time," Marcus cut him off. "Neither do I. The board votes in 72 hours. Naomi's mind raced. This was insane. Marriages like this belonged in historical dramas, not modern-day Manhattan. Yet here she was, her mother's life hanging in the balance, facing down the man who had haunted her thoughts since she was 22 years old. She remembered that first encounter vividly. Fresh out of graduate school, attending a networking event she couldn't afford, wearing a dress borrowed from her roommate. Marcus Sterling had been the keynote speaker, and when he spoke about building something from nothing, about refusing to let circumstances define destiny, something in Naomi's chest had cracked open. After his speech, their eyes had met across the crowded room for exactly 3 seconds before someone important pulled him away. She'd told herself it meant nothing. Over the following decade, their paths crossed periodically. Industry conferences where she was always at the periphery, and he was always at the center. A fundraiser where she'd volunteered as staff and overheard him laughing at something one of his companions said, the sound surprisingly warm. The day her innovative campaign proposal was presented to Sterling Industries, and she'd watched through a glass door as he reviewed it, his expression unreadable, before ultimately rejecting it without explanation. Each encounter had added another layer to her secret, foolish crush. She'd studied his interviews, memorized the cadence of his rare smiles, and hated herself for it. Marcus Sterling was untouchable, and she was nobody. Or so she'd thought. What exactly would this marriage entail? She heard herself ask. Marcus leaned forward slightly, the movement drawing her attention to the elegant lines of his collar, the subtle silver at his temples she'd never noticed before. "Public appearances as needed. You'll move into my penthouse. We'll maintain the appearance of a genuine relationship. Your mother will receive the best care available, and all her medical expenses will be covered indefinitely. And after 3 years, a generous divorce settlement and your freedom." Freedom, the word tasted like ash. Naomi looked down at her hands, at the lotion-cracked knuckles from too many nights washing dishes after her day job to save money. She thought of her mother's face, the way illness had carved hollows where laughter used to live. She thought of Marcus Sterling's hands signing documents that destroyed competitors, building empires while her own world crumbled. "I need to see her," Naomi said quietly. "My mother. I need to talk to her before I decide." For the first time, something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to identify. "Of course. Jonathan will drive you." As Naomi stood to leave, Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying a strange quality she couldn't name. "For what it's worth, Miss Carter, I don't take pleasure in forcing your hand." She turned back, meeting his gaze directly. "Then why do it?" He didn't answer, and the silence stretched between them like a chasm. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and failing flowers. Patricia Carter sat propped against pillows that seemed to swallow her diminishing frame, but her eyes remained sharp and knowing. "Tell me everything," she said after Naomi finished explaining. "It's blackmail disguised as business," Naomi whispered, fighting tears. "How can I marry someone who would manipulate me like this?" Patricia reached for her daughter's hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. "Baby, how long have you been in love with Marcus Sterling?" The question stole Naomi's breath. "I'm not, how did you?" "A mother knows. You've been collecting stories about him like precious stones for 10 years. Every article, every mention, your eyes would change. You thought I didn't notice." Shame burned through Naomi's chest. "It doesn't matter. He doesn't see me as anything but a means to an end. Are you sure?" Patricia's smile held secrets. "A ruthless man doesn't offer to pay indefinitely for a stranger's medical care. He'd put a cap on expenses, minimize his risk, but he said indefinitely, didn't he?" Naomi replayed the conversation, hearing the word again in Marcus's measured tone. "That doesn't mean anything. Maybe, maybe not. But I've lived long enough to know that desperation makes people reveal themselves. He's desperate for this marriage. The question is why." Later that night, alone in her tiny apartment, Naomi found herself scrolling through a decade of memories. The night of that first conference, she'd gone home and searched every interview Marcus Sterling had ever given. She'd watched a video of him at 25, fresh from his first major success, his smile less guarded, his eyes alive with possibility. She'd wondered what had hardened him into the marble man who now sat across conference tables, destroying lives with paperwork. She remembered the fundraiser 5 years ago. She'd been carrying champagne flutes on a tray when someone bumped her from behind. The glasses tilted, headed straight for a senator's wife, and suddenly Marcus was there, catching the tray with reflexes that seemed impossible. His hand had covered hers on the metal surface for exactly 2 heartbeats. He'd looked at her, really looked, and said, "Steady now." Then he'd vanished back into the crowd, leaving her trembling. 3 years ago, at an industry awards ceremony, Naomi had won recognition for a grassroots campaign that revitalized a struggling neighborhood. As she'd stepped off the stage, overwhelmed and clutching her plaque, she'd spotted Marcus Sterling standing near the exit. Their eyes met, and he'd nodded once, a gesture so small she'd convinced herself she'd imagined it. But she'd held on to that nod like a treasure, examining it in lonely moments, wondering if perhaps he'd remembered the girl from that first conference, the woman from the fundraiser. Now, staring at her phone screen, Naomi realized she'd been building a fantasy around fragments and shadows. The real Marcus Sterling was offering her a transaction, nothing more. Except Patricia's words echoed indefinitely. Marcus Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a circuit board of light and ambition. Behind him, Jonathan Reed poured 2 glasses of bourbon neither of them would drink. "You could have offered her a job, covered the medical expenses without the marriage clause," Jonathan said carefully. "This seems extreme." Marcus's reflection in the glass showed nothing. "The board won't approve the merger without family ties. You know this. I know you could have married any of a dozen society darlings who'd jump at the chance. Instead, you chose a mid-level marketing strategist you've supposedly never met." "I've met her." The admission hung in the air. Jonathan waited, knowing better than to push. 10 years ago, Marcus continued, his voice low. She was 22, wearing a blue dress she'd clearly borrowed, standing in the corner of that networking event like she was afraid to take up space. But when I spoke, she listened like every word mattered. After the speech, I saw her across the room, and for 3 seconds, I forgot about every deal I was chasing, every enemy I needed to destroy. Then Richard Pemberton grabbed my arm to introduce me to someone's daughter, and when I looked back, she was gone. Jonathan said nothing, waiting for more. I tried to find her. Searched the guest list. Asked around. No one knew who she was. I told myself it didn't matter. That I'd imagined the connection. Then 2 years later, I'm at a fundraiser, and this woman nearly spills champagne on Senator Morrison's wife. I caught the tray, and when our hands touched, I realized it was her. The girl from the conference. She looked at me like I'd hung the stars, and He stopped, jaw clenched. I walked away. Because men like me don't get to keep things that look at us like that. Marcus. She submitted a proposal 3 years ago. Brilliant work, innovative, exactly the kind of thinking Sterling Industries needed. The team was ready to approve it. I killed it. Why? Because approving it meant meetings, collaboration, proximity. And I knew if I spent time with her, he laughed bitterly, I'd want things I have no right to want. So I rejected her work and convinced myself I was protecting her from me. Jonathan moved to stand beside his friend. And now you're forcing her to marry you. How is that protection? Her mother is dying. I have the resources to save her. The board wants this merger, and I need Naomi's family name to secure it. This way, everyone gets what they need. Except you're not telling her the truth. You're letting her think you're a monster. Marcus's reflection smiled without humor. Isn't that what I am? I've spent 10 years watching her from a distance like some obsessed fool. I know she takes the subway to work even though she's terrified of crowds. I know she volunteers at a literacy center every Thursday evening. I know her favorite coffee shop closed last year, and she still walks past it sometimes, looking sad. I've known about her mother's illness for 6 months. 6 months, Jonathan, and I did nothing until I found an excuse that benefited me. Or, Jonathan said softly, you finally found a way to help her that your pride would allow. Marcus turned from the window. She'll hate me when this is over, but she'll have her mother, financial security, and freedom. That's more than she has now. What about what you'll have? 3 years of pretending I didn't spend a decade being in love with a woman who doesn't know I exist beyond the monster in the news. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. 3 years of the closest I'll ever get to the life I don't deserve. It's more than enough. Naomi signed the contract on a Thursday afternoon, her hand steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. The wedding happened 48 hours later in a judge's chambers, witnessed by Jonathan Reed and a paralegal who looked bored. Marcus slipped a platinum band on her finger that fit perfectly, and Naomi wondered distantly how he'd known her ring size. Moving into the penthouse felt like stepping onto a movie set. Everything gleamed with expensive simplicity. Marble countertops, leather furniture, the color of midnight, windows that turned the city into a living painting. Her belongings, packed hastily into boxes, looked shabby and small in the guest bedroom Marcus had designated as hers. We'll need to combine our things eventually, he'd said, standing in the doorway with characteristic stiffness. 4 appearances. But take your time. The first week passed in a haze of adjustments. Naomi woke early, unused to the silence of luxury. Marcus left for the office before dawn and returned after midnight. They communicated through Jonathan and terse text messages about necessary public appearances. The penthouse felt more like a museum than a home, and Naomi existed in it like a ghost. Their first public appearance came at a charity gala benefiting children's hospitals. Naomi wore a dress Marcus's stylist had selected, emerald green silk, that made her skin glow and cost more than 3 months of her former rent. When Marcus emerged from his bedroom in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, something in his expression shifted as he looked at her. You look, he stopped, jaw working. Beautiful. You look beautiful. The compliment sounded forced, but heat crept up Naomi's neck anyway. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. In the car, tension stretched between them like a living thing. Marcus's driver navigated Manhattan traffic with practiced ease, while Naomi studied her husband's profile in the passing streetlights. She'd spent 10 years admiring him from a distance. Now, inches away, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the way his hands flexed and released in an unconscious rhythm, the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. We need to establish parameters, Marcus said suddenly. At events, we'll maintain appropriate physical contact. Nothing excessive. A hand at your back, perhaps holding hands. We need to appear comfortable with each other. Comfortable, Naomi echoed, thinking of the 10,000 times she'd imagined his hand touching her. Never like this, never as obligation. Right. At the gala, they played their parts with mechanical precision. Marcus introduced her to titans of industry, his hand resting proprietarily at the small of her back. The touch burned through expensive silk, igniting nerve endings Naomi had tried to suppress. She smiled at strangers, accepted congratulations on her marriage, and felt Marcus's thumb unconsciously stroke the fabric of her dress in a gesture that seemed more reflex than intentional. You're doing well, he murmured during a lull, his breath warm against her ear. I'm a good actress. Something dark flickered through his eyes. Yes, you are. Later, as they danced to satisfy expectations, Marcus held her with careful distance, his hand at her waist light as a question mark. Naomi focused on the knot of his tie, unable to meet his eyes, terrified he'd see the truth written in hers. This close, she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something indefinable that made her dizzy. His heartbeat thrummed against her palm, where it rested on his chest, surprisingly fast. Relax, he said quietly. You're shaking. I'm fine. Naomi. The sound of her first name in his mouth, the first time he'd used it, nearly undid her. If this is too much, I said I'm fine. She forced herself to look up, to meet those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams. I'm just unused to lying on such a grand scale. Marcus's expression shuddered. Consider it practice. We have 3 years ahead of us. 3 years of this exquisite torture. 3 years of pretending her heart didn't fracture every time he touched her with clinical detachment. 3 years of loving him while he saw her as nothing but a necessary acquisition. The rest of the evening blurred together. When they finally returned to the penthouse, Naomi headed immediately for her room, desperate for distance. But Marcus's voice stopped her. Thank you, he said, still standing by the door in his tuxedo, looking suddenly, impossibly vulnerable. For tonight, I know this isn't what you wanted. Naomi's laugh tasted bitter. Do you? Do you know what I want, Marcus? She didn't wait for an answer, disappearing into her room before he could see the tears threatening to spill. Behind the closed door, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart, and wondered how she'd survive 3 years of this beautiful agony. In the living room, Marcus stood frozen, staring at the space where she'd been, his hands clenched into fists, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to follow her, to tell her the truth, to stop pretending he didn't feel like he'd been waiting his entire life for her to look at him the way she had for exactly 3 seconds, 10 years ago. The first crack in their carefully maintained distance came 3 weeks into the marriage. Naomi returned from visiting her mother, who was responding well to treatment and looking healthier than she had in months, to find Marcus in the kitchen. This alone was unusual. He typically avoided shared spaces when she was home. He stood at the counter, staring at a coffee maker like it had personally offended him, still wearing his work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, tie discarded. For the first time since she'd moved in, he looked almost human. It's broken, he said without turning around. Naomi set down her bag. Did you try descaling it? I tried everything. It's dead. She moved to his side, acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, and examined the machine. Within minutes, she'd identified the problem, fixed it, and produced 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, and their fingers brushed. Marcus flinched, as if burned. You didn't have to do that, he said. It's just coffee. Still, he wrapped both hands around the mug, looking lost. Thank you. They stood in silence, drinking coffee in the dim kitchen, and for the first time, the quiet between them felt less like tension and more like possibility. Your mother looks well, Marcus said eventually. Jonathan told me. Yes, the treatment it's working. I can't, Naomi's voice caught. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. That was the agreement. Still, Naomi. Her name again, softer this time. You don't owe me gratitude. If anything, I owe you an apology. This situation, this marriage, I know it's not what you deserve. The words cracked something open inside her. 10 years of secret longing, weeks of living with him, the constant ache of proximity without connection, it all surged up at once. What do I deserve, Marcus? She set down her coffee cup too hard. Do you even see me as a person, or am I just another acquisition? Another problem solved? He stared at her, something dangerous awakening in his expression. You think I don't see you. I think you see a useful piece in your corporate puzzle. I think I see everything. The words came out harsh, raw. I see that you take the subway, even though you hate crowds, because you're too practical to waste money on cars. I see that you volunteer every Thursday at a literacy center in the Bronx. I see that you visit your mother every other day and read her mysteries because they're her favorite. I see that your favorite coffee shop closed last year, and you still walk past it sometimes looking like you lost something precious. I see you, Naomi. I've seen you for 10 years. The kitchen seemed to contract, air growing scarce. Naomi's mind reeled. What are you talking about? We barely knew each other before. We met at a networking event 10 years ago. You were wearing a borrowed blue dress. You stood in the corner, afraid to take up space, but you listened to my speech like every word mattered. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Afterward, our eyes met for 3 seconds, and I spent 2 years trying to find you again. When I finally did, at that fundraiser, when you nearly dropped the champagne, I walked away because I knew if I stayed, if I let myself want you, I'd never recover. Naomi couldn't breathe. You remember me from then? I remember everything. Every time we were in the same room, every glance, every moment. 3 years ago, you submitted a proposal to my company. Brilliant work. I rejected it because I couldn't stand the thought of seeing you regularly, of wanting what I had no right to want. What are you saying? Naomi whispered, though part of her already knew, already understood the impossible thing taking shape between them. Marcus moved closer, and she could see his hands trembling. I'm saying I've been in love with you since that first conference. I'm saying I spent 10 years watching from a distance, convincing myself it was better this way, that you deserved better than a man who built his empire on ruthlessness. I'm saying when I learned about your mother's illness, I spent 6 months trying to find a way to help that wouldn't reveal how deeply, how obsessively He stopped, laughed bitterly. This marriage, this arrangement, it wasn't just business. It was the only excuse I could find that my pride would allow. A way to help you, to be near you, even if you spent every day hating me for forcing your hand. The world tilted on its axis. Naomi reached for the counter, steadying herself as 10 years of reality rearranged themselves into a new pattern. You've loved me for 10 years? Pathetically, obsessively, from a distance, like a coward. I thought. Tears spilled over, and she didn't try to stop them. I've had a crush on you since that first conference. I thought I was nobody to you, just another face in the crowd. I collected articles about you like precious stones. My mother knew. She asked me how long I'd been in love with you, and I couldn't even admit it to myself, but… Marcus made a sound like he'd been struck. You? What? I've loved you too, Naomi said, the words breaking free after a decade of captivity. I've loved you, and I hated myself for it, because you were untouchable, and I was nothing. When you proposed this marriage, I thought you were blackmailing me. I thought you saw me as a convenient solution. I never imagined. She didn't finish because Marcus crossed the remaining distance between them, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied his reputation. His thumbs swept away her tears, and he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Naomi Carter, he breathed. You are everything. You've been everything for 10 years. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I made you think otherwise. I'm sorry I forced your hand instead of just telling you the truth. I'm sorry. She kissed him. After 10 years of longing, of secret glances, and impossible dreams, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Marcus froze for exactly 1 heartbeat before responding with a decade of suppressed hunger. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him like he'd drown without her anchor. The kiss tasted of coffee and tears, and the particular sweetness of truth finally spoken. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. Stop deciding what you deserve, Naomi said, her hands fisted in his shirt. I spent 10 years thinking the same thing. We both did. Maybe that's why we're here. Maybe we were supposed to find each other this way. 3 years, Marcus murmured. The contract says 3 years. So we renegotiate. Naomi pulled back enough to meet his eyes, seeing them clearly for the first time, vulnerable, afraid, blazing with an emotion that matched the one in her chest. We've already wasted 10 years, Marcus. I don't want to waste another second pretending this is anything other than what it is. And what is it? She smiled, the expression transforming her face the way he'd always dreamed it would when directed at him. It's 2 idiots who fell in love, and were too scared to admit it. It's a decade of almost moments, finally becoming real. It's the beginning of whatever comes next. Marcus kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. When he spoke, his lips brushed hers. I love you. I've loved you for 10 years, and I'll love you for 10,000 more. Then we'd better get started, Naomi whispered. We have a lot of time to make up for. Outside the kitchen windows, Manhattan glittered with indifferent beauty. But inside, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, two people who'd spent a decade orbiting each other finally collided. The contract still sat in a drawer somewhere, its 3-year clause suddenly meaningless. They'd written their own agreement 10 years ago, with a 3-second glance across a crowded room. Everything since had just been the long, painful journey home.